Thanks very much, Ruth. And I wish I could be with you in Trondheim in person, but it's a good setting best to be here virtually. And I think we've had some great insights from all around the world from all four speakers there. I want to make one point, which I think leads to a question for all of the speakers, actually. The point, and it's a little surprising it wasn't covered, maybe it wasn't covered because it's so obvious to the speakers, is that the impacts of climate change are themselves very unfair. We know that they fall most heavily on the poorest people in the poorest countries. And what flows from that is the most unfair energy transition we can have is a slow transition or no transition at all. So that leads to my question about the focus that we have sometimes, and we heard it from Phoumin about Southeast Asia. I also hear it in my own country about the need for a just transition to take account of the needs of people currently working in the fossil fuel sector. It's an issue that has a salience to me, as I was born and brought up in a coal-producing region in England. But I want to ask about the risk of that. It does seem to me that there's a possibility that this risks focusing on the interests of the incumbent sectors, discounting the jobs creation potential in energy efficiency, in renewable energy, discounting the benefits of a decentralized renewable sector in the global south. Should we be putting as much emphasis on the interests of the existing incumbent fossil fuel industries within the notion of the just transition?
Good question. Who would you like to reply to that first?
Oh, I'm going to let you decide that, Ruth.
Well, I can't see the panel right now, but I think I'm going to have them on the screens, because if I were to see them, I would actually see who wants to go first. But I'm just guessing now, so I think now I can see them. So do I see any hands raised? Anyone here who would like to start answering that question? Yes, Wanjira, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. That's a great question. But I think I addressed it in my remarks earlier on, the issue of climate justice, but also in just the nature of the transition and the what of the transition, or the why of the transition. It's not to transition purely because of emissions, but we have a situation where 70% of Africans don't have access to energy. It's an energy access issue as well. It's about the devastating impacts of cooking in inefficient ways, and we heard that from our very first speaker. So absolutely right that so much else ought to guide the drive and the ambition for the energy transition, and of course the jobs. But I think it is been reported that some of the efficiency benefits, especially around jobs and even on some of the other solutions, still do not come close to the jobs opportunities created by renewables. But I couldn't agree more. For Africa, the driving force in this transition and the justice therein has to be about access, about SDG 7, and getting affordable access to energy for all. And that is a very important agenda for Africa. And then, of course, poverty at the center of it all, that the part of the industrialization agenda for Africa is about powering Africa out of poverty. And that is, that is almost non-negotiable for us. So thanks.
Thank you. Phoumin, I guess you can agree with Wanjira on this, that first of all, we need access to energy, first of all, for the millions who lack it today.
Yes, both, and thank you so much also, Nick, for posting a very, I think, interesting question. This is what actually the concern that during energy transition. I think there always need to be balancing that in my presentation. Any roll out future policies or policy measure they need to be carefully balancing of the what type of job, particularly for people who are largely employed in this fossil fuel sector already, let's say coal mining or with the traditional job that they are currently doing. And normally when we transition, not only about the clean fuel type, but it involves with technologies. It involves a little bit upgrading technology. For example, if let's say to get electricity more clean, we need to increase renewable. In that case, wind and solar are intermittent. You need to have better grid capacities and technology upgrade. So in that case, I think the concern of the moving from one job to another is one thing. But another is to upgrade the current job to meet a standard of future job requirement is another. So reskilling, upskilling is one of the important that institution that need to do. But for job relocation, I think this is a whole job that the entire industry policymaker had need to think that what transition, what job will be affected, not about just transition. And of course, I think in terms of energy access, I already mentioned, if the transition is going to cost a lot, that will be a big issue because energy affordability and energy access remain quite important. And to be fair, that per capita emission quite low for this region as well as in Africa. So what are the policy need to ensure that they have a smooth transition? I think this is a big question for all policymakers in this region. Yeah, thank you.
Nick, are you satisfied, or would you like some more considerations from the panel on your question? Because it's not only about, switching jobs, as you pointed out. I can't see Benjamin here, but I think that's because he might be on a different type of line. But are you still there, Benjamin? Maybe you would like to add a bit on this. No, I can't hear Benjamin. So, Nick.
Okay.
Yep, I can see Michael. Actually, Michael would like to comment. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I think the point made by Nick is spot on. In fact, the bigger injustice at play here is climate change. So when we're talking about fairness and justice, addressing climate change is really at the top of the list. And when we look at SDG 7, part of it talks about climate change when we look at increasing renewable energy and improving energy efficiency. These are key tools to mitigate the effects of climate change and redress this injustice. And then part of it looks at access to energy, which is also about injustice. But in terms of talking about the transition and the incumbent fossil fuel industry, I think the point is we can do both at the same time. We can expand the energy transition, we can transform the supply side and the demand side of the energy economy, create lots of new jobs and new industries and new economic opportunities. But that doesn't mean that we can't look after the interests of affected communities who are affected by the phase out of coal. And I think these communities have particular needs. Often they're in geographically isolated regions where there's not a lot of other economic activities happening. And it's difficult for them to transition into new industries. So we can project, for example, when we move from fossil to renewables, there are more jobs created on a macro level, but on a micro level, those jobs might be in different industries with different skills, or maybe even in different countries. Yeah. So I think what we're saying is that we're sounding this alarm that this transition is happening. It's happening faster than many politicians may think. And what we need to do is to plan effectively for this transition so that we can take care of the needs of these communities, give them the chance to diversify local economies, gain new skills, and find new employment. But having said that, Nick's point is correct. The number of people in coal mining has been declining for a long time, even in countries where coal production has gone up because of new technologies. So it's not an enormous number of people that are affected, but it is possible to look after both sides of the equation at the same time. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. And just to add, would you say that the SGAP has an important role in making this transition happen?
Yeah, so we operate the largest, of the UN's 5 regional commissions. So Asia Pacific is an enormous region with a huge amount of diversity. There are advanced industrialized countries along with least developed countries among our membership. So one of the key roles that we play is provide a platform for countries to craft, a regional agenda on issues such as the energy transition, but also support each other in terms of providing technical expertise and sharing some of the best practices. So we also work with a lot of other members of the UN family, including the International Labour Organization, who are very active in this issue of promoting green jobs agenda and also this just transition. So definitely SGAP is working with these issues, and our platform is kind of the key means with which countries in the Asia Pacific can work together to improve the prospects in this area.
Thank you so far. Now I can see that we have Benjamin with us, but I would like to give Marianne the possibility to pop a question or to challenge the panel. Go ahead, Marianne. What's on your mind?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the introduction and for the interesting introductory talks. I also want to pick up on some of the previous points made by the speakers. If you look at the paradox of sustainability, this is a concept coming from the Brundtland report, Our Common Future, as we know, and is very much tied into the energy transition. But looking at the world today, it doesn't really seem like a common world. It depends a lot where we stand and which position you take, how the world looks. So it looks very different, as Benjamin pointed out. If we are in Norway, the solution seems to be electric cars and electric ferries. And this doesn't necessarily... this isn't necessarily a solution in New Delhi or other places in the world. And with this in mind, I would like to highlight a point made by one of the greatest thinkers within my field, Sheila Jasanoff, that the relationship between global centers, power centers, and local issues are really and deeply problematic, as global power centers are defining the problems and solutions with little thought to local issues, so that there are persistent mismatches between problems, policy framings, and solutions. And technological change is seen essential to the transition, but less attention is paid to the fact that these disparities within societies demand different solutions. So my question then is, what do you think, how can we solve this problem of who gets to decide the problems, the framings, the policy framings, and the solutions? How can we make sure that those that this far are populating power centers or benefiting from the ongoing transition are not the only ones determining how to transition in the future?
Good question.
That was
Yeah, but who would you like to go first? Do you have any preferences there, or should we leave the word to Benjamin first, maybe? Who we lost him in the last round. He's laughing. So go ahead, Benjamin.
Geez, yeah, thanks, Marianne. Good to see you. Two very quick reflections. My colleague Andy Sterling here at Sussex would say social movements are the answer. That if you look at the history of where society has made good progress, it hasn't usually been led by science or by corporations. Things like the abolition of slavery, women's suffrage, even more recent campaigns like anti-whaling in the 70s. So he would kind of say that the solution is exactly local community groups and social movements that kind of go up a level and just campaign for rights. I'm a little bit more skeptical of that, because I think in this current age, a lot of these social movements and local groups can be subject to populism. That can also give you things like Brexit or Trump. So I'm not sure that social movements have that power anymore. My response would be Elinor Ostrom's notion of polycentrism seems very apt, because that says that, global players are important and top-down action with regulations is important, but it needs coupled with local bottom-up action. So to really oversimplify Ostrom, it's bottom-up meets top-down in the middle. And it's everyone working together at multiple scales that creates a strong governance network.
Thank you. Wanjira, I'm directing this to you because, I mean, social movements, that has been at the core of what you've been doing for 2 decades. And do you agree with Benjamin when he says what he's saying? And I would like to add another question to you, which is from the audience. And I would like to have some of your perspectives on that. Does the global north have a moral responsibility to help create a more equitable transition in developing regions? So 2 questions for you, more or less, there at the same time. Go ahead, Wanjira.
Right. Well, to the first one, I agree with I think Benjamin about the double-edged nature of social movements, but I think that is also not the reason not to engage. I think they are still a really important part of the conscience of most countries, and they will continue to drive public perception, certainly engagement, and so we need them. We need them absolutely, and they bring us sometimes Trump, but they then allow us to think about what we did. And I think the rise in populism around the world is a cause for concern, and it's driving a lot of introspection. It's driving a lot of very important changes within across different institutions, across governments, and so maybe shocks are necessary. And then on the issue you've mentioned, absolutely. I mean, the issue of climate justice is really what this is about. I think it's been mentioned again and again. Africa has done, and certainly the least developed countries, the developing world, have done the least to cause the climate crisis, and yet will be disproportionately affected. And I think that was where the issue of finance within the Paris Agreement came in, recognizing that most of these countries will have to be supported to make the necessary transitions, to adapt and invest in adaptation at levels that are way beyond their own ability to withstand. So yes, I hope that we will continue to see the solidarity of the North, and certainly that a lot of the commitments made will be met. We are still really far off with respect to climate commitments and on finance. And even though there has been some progress, a lot more to be done. And so I hope so. But I also agree that locally and within the national levels, we have to do our part as countries to protect and cushion our societies, especially around nature-based solutions. These are things we can do. We are blessed with abundant nature in most of our countries, and we have to do everything we can within our policies, within our transparency and accountability systems to make sure that it works, and then we can look to our friends as well to support.
But I mean, you're saying we're far from reaching the level of commitment that you want. What is needed to accelerate and to make this commitment visible and actually substantial?
Well, there's a lot, but one of the biggest indicators is the 100 billion commitment for climate finance. We just haven't seen that, and so that's a very good indicator for those of us where trust is completely eroding with respect to commitments on adaptation. And then obviously a more balanced treatment of adaptation within the climate finance regime. We're seeing almost, I think it's 20% of all climate finance that has gone to adaptation. Very little, and yet that is really where Africa needs to invest, and certainly most of the global south. So yeah, I haven't seen many indicators that we are doing great, but we are certainly continuing to push and make progress.
Yeah. Thank you. What about our Asian representatives? What kind of commitment are you seeing from the global north when it comes to taking the moral responsibilities? Phoumin, would you like to go first?
Thank you so much, Ruth. I think this always that the issue that in the global commitment, I think countries have pledged their commitment to the COP targets for emission, but I think they also expect the support from developed countries in terms of financing. In that case, how they able to achieve further in terms of emission reduction? I think each of the country have highlighted these two targets clearly. So I think there's, to my understanding, there are shortfall in the global commitment to support developing world to achieve their climate friendly or emission reduction. But just want to share with you one thing that Marianne asked, that the missing gap of the global commitment and local commitment. I think this is because I think there's lack of understanding to some extent. For I take one example, when the global commitment to ban coal power generation, and in that case, more of OECD follow that all the multilateral banking stop financing coal. But they forget that Chinese is not a member of OECD. They still financing many African and Asian. So in that case, in terms of emission for them is going up because they will get more low efficiency coal power plant in that case, compared to the earlier one that they use more efficient technology, because only Chinese alone financing, they can opt to the lowest level of efficiency. In that case, I think it's one of the practical example that the missing link, or I call the policy blind, that they need to revisit kind of such a policies that this to my understanding. Yeah.
Thank you, Phoumin. Benjamin, I noticed you were nodding. Did you have anything you would like to add there?
No, I just completely agree with both comments. I mean, stopping finance of coal, I was just forwarding to my group a memo from the International Energy Agency today before this conference that actually coal consumption will outpace renewables consumption for the next year as economies rebound from COVID.
Right.
And the financing needs for adaptation are spot on. The international community, it's been estimated they need 1 to 2 trillion a year invested in adaptation to improve resilience, and yet we're not even making 100 billion a year. We are magnitudes of order failing to invest in adaptation, and then countries are doing things like financing coal-fired power plants. So it is a bit of a farce.
A farce, nonetheless. Yes, Michael, I can see you're smiling a bit there. I mean, you're representing the UN in this panel. What is your take on this? The commitments.
Yeah, I think there's
yes, go ahead.
a couple of different dimensions to this discussion. I think when you look at a region like the Asia Pacific, obviously a lot of the issues and solutions that are circulating in Europe and North America don't necessarily neatly apply. So there is certainly a need to form this bridge between kind of global level agendas and commitments and national level action. And that's kind of the gap in which ESCAP sits as a regional commission. So we provide, I guess, a forum or a platform for countries to work together on common solutions. But our region is so huge that we have sub-regions which have their own peculiar characteristics, like the Pacific or North and Central Asia and South Asia. So what these countries are doing is working together and sharing a lot of the best practice policies and solutions and technologies that are needed. And, you know, one example is electric vehicles. Okay, so the model of everybody having their own electric car doesn't really work in South Asia or many parts of Asia Pacific. What's more needed is smaller vehicles which are electrified, or electrification of public transport, because otherwise we run the risk of going backwards in terms of climate emissions and embedded energy and road congestion. So that's just one example. In terms of the coal issue that just came up with what Benjamin was discussing, this is really critical for Asia Pacific, because when you look at the pipeline of coal-fired power stations which are not built but are planned to be built, 94% of that pipeline sits in Asia Pacific. So tackling the energy policy frameworks of these countries is a really, really important aspect of what the UN family is trying to do. If you look at coal financing, hopefully we're at the start of a positive trend of coal financing seen to being more risky and less future-proof than financing renewables. Despite the short-term trend, I hope the long-term trend is more positive, because right now the risk premium for coal-fired investments compared to renewables is a lot higher, which is a sign that this future low-carbon policy environment is being factored into investment decisions today.
That's food for thought. Nick and Marianne, do you have any other perspectives that you would like to add to the conversation? I'm looking at you now, Nick.
I just wanted to slightly move us past the between country aspects of inequality. They're clearly very important, and I would expect colleagues who work for international organisations in particular to focus on those. But I think there are some important within country aspects as well. I believe it's the case that the rising middle classes in both China and India now outnumber the population of even large European countries and have higher average emission levels than European countries, and so this sort of plays to the point that Benjamin made about populism. One of the difficulties in promoting an international justice agenda in European countries is that large groups of people don't feel that they are richer and better off than people in other countries, even though they clearly are better off than the poorest people in the poorest countries. But those issues of inequality within countries become very important constraints. So it isn't the case that everybody in Europe can afford an electric vehicle. In fact, only a minority of people in Europe can currently afford an electric vehicle. So how do we address those inequalities within the transition as well?
Yeah. Is there anyone in particular in the panel that you would like to start off with that?
Well, I appreciate that's difficult for colleagues who work for international organisations. So I'll direct it at Benjamin, I think.
Go ahead, Benjamin.
No, it's a great point, and Nick is also right that a lot of these decisions maybe are parts of lobbying or politics. For instance, in Norway, a lot of the incentives have been on battery electric vehicles, but not other forms of low carbon mobility, right? Like e-bikes or e-scooters, or even maybe walking or cargo bikes and all these other aspects. Whereas in Finland, it's the opposite. There's a lot of work on ride sharing, mobility as a service, but a little less incentives for things like EVs. And so you get into national culture and different kind of regimes of policymaking. In terms of a solution, my colleague Kirsten Jenkins, who Nick knows, has been talking about responsible innovation and design. And that's a good starting point. When we think about how we design a power plant, a solar panel, an EV, a bicycle, it goes also with this notion of inclusion. We include not just global players, but local actors and other people, so we can design more inclusive technologies that start to address some of these issues. So in the case of EVs, maybe it's not always having a Tesla. Maybe it's having a really mass-produced, lower income bracket of transport options that cost £10,000 or £5,000, or it's other modes of financing for them where you don't even own the vehicle, you just pay for the service. That could start to get us to more equitable patterns of adoption, because right now a lot of these patterns of adoption just mirror many of the inequalities that are entrenched into these countries.
Thank you. Marianne, do you have another topic or question that you would like to address?
I don't know if it's another topic, but I think it's important, just as Benjamin said, to have a focus on how not only local and global tension call for more inclusive politics of sustainability, but we also have to look at this both vertically and horizontally in a way. And the fact that we know that these green technologies there are no silver bullets. But we need to tackle broad and diverse problems, and problems that sometimes are created by these same exact technologies and industrialization. So for me, the question is then, how can we support such a transition that also put social justice into the core? And for me, as a researcher, I also think this has to do with the scientific practices and how we think about science and what knowledge we really need to move forward. So if somebody would like to have some thoughts on that, I think that would be interesting.
Yeah. Do I see any raise of hands in the panel for this? Well, so far they're a bit quiet. Would you, on the last point you made about science, would you like to elaborate a bit on that, Marianne?
Yes, my point is that I think when we are trying to transform society, we cannot achieve this change with the same knowledge that we already have. So we have to think more about scientific disciplines and practices, and be more open about how this shape what we know and what we don't know. So, for instance, Benjamin and others also pointed out areas where we clearly have a lack of knowledge so far. Adaptation research, and there's ignorance about the disparities between groups, within countries, for instance. And I think to counteract this, we need to have more reflexive science practices and knowledge, acknowledging and working with insecurity and what we do not know as well.
Well, thank you. I can see that people are nodding, so I guess they do agree with you on that, Marianne. We are actually closing in on the end of the discussion, and I would like to, just because there are questions coming in, and Wanjira, we didn't get time to talk about the gender issue, but there is a question regarding that. So you can keep that in mind for the final sum up comments that you're going to give. So the question to you, Wanjira, is how can we prevent talk of justice from narrowing down to plain socioeconomic categories, such as access, availability and affordability? So that you can dwell on that a little bit. And I'll add that to the final question to all of you in the panel, including the two panelists, and you had 30 seconds to reply. Is there hope for a truly just and fair transition? And if yes, who needs to take the lead to ensure it? Aha. So I think I'm just going to start on the left-hand side on the screen that I'm seeing. So that means I'm going to start with Michael. Go ahead. What do you think? Is there hope?
Absolutely, there is hope. I mean, this agenda that we're all working on is an optimistic agenda. We're working to transform the energy system that will protect the environment and result in a better deal for people. And I think the challenge is to make sure that the benefits of this are distributed evenly amongst different groups of people and even between different countries. And in this effort, I think it's really a multi-stakeholder effort. It has to be everybody, government, civil society, private sector, needs to work on this. And the key thing is speed, I think, because unlike other transitions we've had in the past, this one will be much deeper, but much more rapid. So we need to be ready for change at extreme velocity. Thanks.
Thank you. So speed and depth. Thank you very much. So Phoumin, what do you think? Is it possible to have this truly just and fair transition, and who should take the lead in ensuring it?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ruth. I think I also agree with all speakers. I think the energy transition, it needs to participate from all stakeholders. But the most important, I think the government need to lead first, because it's important that if the government commitment very clearly, and then that can translate and send this right signal for other partner, other stakeholder. I think government is the most important to lead this. And then, of course, you need to bring in all key stakeholders. And we know that the successful, it needs to come from private sector in terms of how to roll out the technology to ensure that everything is go okay. But the most final thing, I think the consumer and public participation, I think that's the most important. If they are not involved, I think they are not supporting. For example, if you are roll out to the cleaner energies, it needs to be clearly transparent. In the short term, what going to be impact, in the long term, what it going to impact. In that case, I think their participation is the most important I think everyone needs to participate, but the government needs to lead first. That's my point of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phoumin. Wanjira.
Yes, really good question. I mean, the talk of justice definitely ought to be more than just those issues. But I think what we often forget, and I said that in my opening, was it's about people. It's about humans and ensuring that they can protect themselves. They can build the sort of resilience they need to survive and to thrive. And that's, for me, is what drives all of this, so that we don't forget it's not a mechanical discussion about how many light bulbs. It's about ensuring that people are able to live their best lives. And I think that is therefore adds issues of resilience and economic opportunity, that people can support healthy, happy families. So that to me is constantly on my mind when I think about these issues. And of course, all stakeholders must be involved. Certainly in our part of the world, the biggest signals come from government. And I think that is an important key player in driving it all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wanjira. And Benjamin.
So I agree that governments can lead and corporations can lead, but I also think there's an important case that we can lead ourselves. I mean, 72% of global greenhouse gas emissions are related to our consumption. So the choices that we make about how much meat we eat, how much we fly, the type of car we purchase, and how much we walk can have a massive impact. So I think that change and leadership needs to begin with all of us who consume.
Short and easy, and not that easy after all, I think. I promised I would give Marianne and Nick a final word, but we are running over time. Do you have like a very, very short message to us there, Marianne and Nick? Can you promise us to be short? Yes, then you can have the word. Marianne first.
Well, I think the fact that we are, in fact, discussing this and as an introductory topic of the conference brings some hope, at least, that we are focusing on the injustices, who is ignored, and what is a fair process. I think that's a bit at least promising.
Thank you very much, Marianne. And Nick, final word from you.
Yes, there's hope. Governments at all levels will be critical, and for those of us fortunate enough to live in a democracy, that places some responsibility on all of us.
It does. Well, thank you, everybody in the panel, for making this first discussion very interesting and thought-provoking. And thanks a lot for the very nice contributions from all of you, and also from the attendees, the audience, who have been asking questions. And I see they are popping in and out, and keep them coming.